Savannah Whitaker hesitated at the threshold of first class, her heart hammering against her ribs like a frightened bird. The polished leather seats curved invitingly before her, bathed in the soft glow of overhead reading lights. Sunlight filtered through the oval windows, illuminating the cabin in a warm, golden haze. She'd dreamed of this moment for months. Saving every frequent flyer mile, sacrificing weekend outings, trading birthday presents for extra credit points, so that she could sit here, in 1A, on her own, for the very first time. But as she clutched her carry-on strap, a sudden chill washed over her. The hush that had settled over the cabin felt heavy, oppressive, as though every passenger sensed something was about to go wrong. Savannah drew in a slow breath, reminding herself that she earned this seat. Between top grades at Greenwich Academy and a scholarship you wouldn't believe, she'd worked her tail off. She was more than a student. She was someone who belonged here. A crisp voice cut through the silence. "Miss, step aside." Savannah looked up to see Clarice Morton, the lead flight attendant, standing directly in front of her. Clarice's uniform was immaculate. Crisp navy blazer, starched white blouse, perfect coiffure. But her eyes flickered with something cold and unwelcoming. She held a sleek tablet in one hand, and with the other, she gestured imperiously toward the back of the plane. "This seat's not for students," Clarice continued, her tone dripping with condescension. "Follow me, and I'll show you where you really belong." Time fractured. The woman's words echoed in Savannah's mind as she stood frozen. The glow of overhead lights suddenly too bright, too harsh. The passenger in 1B, a middle-aged executive in a tailored suit, paused mid-stretch and glanced over, his eyebrows raised. Across the aisle, an elderly couple exchanged puzzled looks, their hands resting on fine china cups in the seatback trays. Even the flight attendant at the far end of the cabin stopped folding towels and watched. Every single eye was on her. Humiliation blossomed in Savannah's chest, hot and blooming. She felt her cheeks flare. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack, the one she'd bought second-hand, embroidered with a simple white star. The mile-high diplomas from her AP history class felt worthless now. For a moment, she could almost hear her guidance counselor's praise ringing hollow. "You're going places, Savannah. You'll make your mark. But not here. Not today." Savannah's lips pressed into a thin line. She had rehearsed this in front of her bedroom mirror. "Excuse me, ma'am. I paid for this seat. I checked in and confirmed it." But now, confronted with Clarice's steely gaze and the weight of dozens of silent witnesses, her rehearsed words dissolved. Instead, she found herself whispering, I'm sorry?" Clarice's nostrils flared, as though affronted by Savannah's question. She tapped a few commands on her tablet, a digital boarding pass scrolling across the screen. "Yes, you're sorry. This is Economy Plus," she explained, voice pitched just loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "There's been a change. You'll see your new seat on the display." Savannah swallowed, her throat tight. She glanced down at her own boarding pass. GJ 782, seat 1A, confirmed a solid month ago. She'd double-checked it last night, framed it on her desk like a trophy. Now it felt like a lie. Her eyes flicked to the overhead bin. She'd tucked her designer carry-on up there, the same one her mother had given her for graduation. She wanted to cry, wanted to scream, but neither felt like an option. Not here, not now. Instead, she bit her lip and said, as quietly as she could, "Why?" The cabin held its breath. Clarice smirked, a thin, cruel curve of her lips. "Because," she said, voice low yet theatrical, "sometimes first class is reserved for people who look like they belong here." The final word hung in the air, a dagger draped in silk. Savannah's chest tightened, a well of anger mingling with the sting of shame. She felt tears prick the corners of her eyes but blinked them back. She had a reputation to maintain. Even if no one here knew or cared about her grades, her college prospects, or the scholarship her father had fought to obtain for her. At that moment, Savannah realized this was more than just a seat. It was a signal, a reminder from someone in authority that she didn't measure up. The jacket she wore, hand-me-downs from her older brother, faded at the collar, suddenly felt like a neon sign flashing not enough. The threadbare patches on her jeans seemed to scream her poverty, her outsider status. She swallowed again, jaw clenching. For the 1,000th time she reminded herself of who she really was. Not just a 17-year-old student, but the daughter of Eli Whitaker, CEO of Whitaker Global Group, a man whose decisions shaped entire industries. She was more than this cabin door, more than Clarice's scorn, more than the stunned faces all around her. Slowly, deliberately, Savannah lifted her chin. She forced a polite, measured tone as she said, "Ma'am, if there's been an error, I'll be happy to speak with your supervisor." Her voice was calm, controlled, far more composed than she felt on the inside. Clarice's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. The woman paused, her eyes flicking from Savannah's face to the tablet in her hand. Savannah could almost sense the shift in the cabin's energy. The hum of the engines, the ticking of seatbelt signs, all seemed to recede as everyone focused on this quiet exchange. Then, with a dramatic sigh, Clarice tapped her tablet. "Your supervisor is indisposed," she said, "and I'm the authority here." Savannah's stomach roiled. She glanced at the passenger beside her. "Business class?" muzzled to smile, who shrugged as though nothing mattered. A single mother across the aisle looked at her with sympathetic eyes, nodding faintly. Even the elderly couple's hands tightened together. In that moment of collective tension, Savannah knew she had two choices: yield and slink to the back, or stand her ground and risk every ounce of her dignity. Her breath came in quiet, steadying gulps. Somewhere deep inside, a spark flickered. It wasn't just about first class. It was about belonging, about respect, about refusing to let someone else define her worth on the basis of a uniform or an assumption. Savannah lifted her phone from her pocket and slid her thumb to the call button. Her heart pounded again, but this time with anticipation, not fear. As Clarice returned her tablet to her chest, Savannah met her gaze, steady, unflinching, and pressed FaceTime without a word. The cabin erupted into silence so profound it felt sacred, as if everyone sensed this quiet little girl was about to change everything. Savannah Whitaker couldn't remember a time she'd been so excited and nervous at once. It was the first morning she'd ever flown alone, and she'd woken before dawn to drive from Greenwich, Connecticut down to the airport, her heart fluttering like a captive bird. She'd packed and repacked her carry-on the night before, a soft gray backpack stamped with a white star that had been her older brother's college bag, now pressed into service to hold her essentials. Inside were her textbooks, just in case she had a moment to study, headphones for the flight, a journal in which she'd carefully inscribed every milestone of her high school career, and a framed photo of her and her mom on her graduation day. She'd stood in front of the mirror for what felt like an hour, adjusting her dark-washed jeans, smoothing out the cuffs of her cream-colored sweater, and finally deciding that her favorite worn-in sneakers would give her the confidence to stride into first class like she belonged. She wanted to look casual, approachable, down to earth, so that nobody would guess she was the daughter of Eli Whitaker, one of the wealthiest people in Connecticut. She'd learned early on that humility could be her greatest armor. As her ride pulled up to the terminal, Savannah's breath caught in her throat. The modern glass facade of the airport gleamed in the autumn morning light, its high ceilings and polished floors promising adventure. She glanced at her phone's lock screen, an alert confirming seat 1A on Global Jet Flight 782, then slid it back into her pocket. She could hardly believe it. The reward for 3 years of top-tier grades at Greenwich Academy and a streak of acceptances from every university she'd applied to. She'd chosen Harvard for its stellar pre-law program, but this trip was personal. Her mom, recently diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer, was undergoing her second round of chemotherapy in San Francisco. Savannah was determined to be there for her, to sit beside her hospital bed and remind her that she wasn't alone in this fight. She wheeled her carry-on through the TSA checkpoint with practiced ease, greeting the agents with a calm good morning, and offering her boarding pass with the same confidence she used to navigate parent-teacher conferences and scholarship interviews. Even if her stomach was doing somersaults, she refused to let anyone see a tremor in her voice. She was the picture of composure. And that, to Savannah, was everything. Once through security, she found the Global Jet lounge and exhaled for the first time since waking. The plush chairs and free coffee were a far cry from the drab waiting area she'd visited as a kid, years before her dad had quietly acquired a controlling stake in the airline. She tucked herself into a corner, slipped off her backpack, and reached for her journal. With a fountain pen, another gift from her dad, she penned a quick note. Chapter 2, Flying Solo. First time on my own, first class, first test of courage. She drew a little star next to her heading, then closed the book. Across the lounge, she noticed a framed plaque on the wall. Global Jet, connecting dreams since 1965. It reminded her that dreams were often what carried people forward, even when circumstances tried to hold them back. For Savannah, this flight was more than just transportation. It was a testament to her own perseverance, a physical bridge between the comforting walls of her childhood home and the cold, sterile rooms of a California oncology ward. When the boarding call came, she rose, slinged her backpack over her shoulder, and walked down the jet bridge with deliberate steps. She tried to ignore the familiar self-doubt at the edge of her mind. What if I'm too young? What if I'm not taken seriously? What if I embarrass myself? But every time that voice whispered, she repeated her father's favorite saying, "You're stronger than you know." As she rounded the corner into the cabin, she caught her first glimpse of what she'd worked for. Rows of buttery leather seats, glossy wood accents, personal touchscreen monitors built into every armrest. The air smelled faintly of citrus cleanser and new upholstery. A flight attendant, smiling warmly, greeted her by name as she stepped aboard. "Ms. Whitaker, welcome aboard Global Jet Flight 782. First class is this way." The moment felt electric. Savannah lifted her chin and allowed herself a small smile of triumph. Yes, she thought, I earned this. She placed her carry-on in the overhead bin, settled into seat 1A, and exhaled. The hum of the engines sounded like a promise. She reached for the in-flight magazine tucked into the seat pocket, its glossy pages featuring travel destinations she'd only dreamed of, and traced her finger along an article about San Francisco's Golden Gate Park, the very place she'd take her mom when chemotherapy was over. For a fleeting moment, the weight of her mom's illness pressed down on her chest, an ache that went beyond any seat reassignment or awkward aisle confrontation. Here, at 35,000 feet halfway across the country, Savannah felt both powerful and vulnerable. Powerful because she'd charted her course to this precise seat. Vulnerable because her reason for being here was someone else's. She closed her eyes and pictured her mom's gentle smile. "You've got this, Savvy," she imagined her mother saying, using the nickname she'd outgrown years ago. "You shine in every room you walk into." The seatbelt sign dinged on. The cabin lights dimmed, and the flight attendant passed by, offering a hot towel and a menu for the flight's culinary selections. Savannah accepted them with a nod, scanning the options, her stomach twisting at the thought of dessert, but she smiled at the menu's chocolate mousse with raspberry coulis, reminding herself that this was, after all, a special occasion. She set the menu aside and opened her journal again, penning a second note. First class feels like a promise. Now, to see if the skies keep it. Outside her window, the wing flexed against a backdrop of cloud-wrapped sunlight. Savannah reflected on how far she'd come. From the classrooms of Greenwich Academy, where she'd been one of the top students, to this leather throne in the sky. She thought about her summer internship with a local law firm, her late nights researching constitutional cases, the countless mock debates where she'd argued for fairness and equity. This was her next debate, her highest stage yet, proving that a deserving student, no matter her age or what she wore, deserved the dignity of her hard-earned seat. Just then, a ripple of movement passed through the cabin, a cluster of passengers whispering and pointing. Savannah sat up, her heart thudding. She braced for anything, unaware that the moment she'd dreamed of so many months was about to collide head-on with the prejudice she never expected to encounter. She inhaled, squared her shoulders, and waited for her moment, for her challenge, for the unexpected turn that would test every ounce of her resolve. In the hush of first class, Savannah Whitaker understood that her journey was no longer just about miles flown or grades earned. It was about standing her ground at 35,000 feet. Savannah slid quietly into the aisle as boarding continued around her, eyes fixed on the soft sheen of first-class leather. She felt its gentle embrace before she even sat down, a promise of comfort she'd earned through late-night study sessions and sacrificed weekends. But as she hovered beside seat 1A, a peculiar chill crept over her. Not from the air conditioning vents overhead, but from the glance the lead flight attendant, Clarice Morton, shot her way. Clarice stood just a few steps ahead, clipboard in hand and posture rigid as a freshly pressed uniform. She'd welcomed each passenger with a practiced smile, delighting in warm greetings and carefully folded blankets. But when Savannah approached, the smile vanished, replaced by a measured scrutiny that felt almost clinical. It was the kind of look you'd get if you were an odd specimen under a microscope. Fascinating, maybe, but certainly not welcome. "Boarding pass and ID, please," Clarice said, voice neutral, yet laced with an unmistakable edge. She held out her hand, palm up. Savannah's chest tightened. She'd expected the usual, "May I see your boarding pass?" a perfunctory check before settling in. Instead, Clarice's tone hinted that this was more than routine. She fumbled in her hoodie pocket, extracting her phone-sized boarding pass wallet. Her fingers brushed the edge of the laminated card. GJ 782, Seat 1A. Savannah Whitaker. Then she retrieved her Connecticut driver's license, still warm from the pocket. She extended it to Clarice, chin high despite the flutter in her stomach. Clarice held the boarding pass at arm's length, flipping it over with deliberate slowness, scanning every line. Then she took the ID, comparing the photo to Savannah's face. She squinted as if hunting for a discrepancy. Savannah's throat churned. She had a perfect track record, confirmed her seat weeks ago, checked in online the night before, double-checked all documentation. Yet here she was under a spotlight meant to expose error. She forced herself to breathe slowly. All around them, other passengers circled into their seats with ease. A businessman in row 2B never produced more than his pass, and Clarice simply nodded before moving on. An elderly couple barely glanced at the attendant as she offered them a cocktail napkin. But Savannah remained held in place, every second a reminder that she was somehow other in this polished cabin. After a long beat, Clarice handed the ID back, but not without one last look of thinly veiled skepticism. Savannah slid into her seat, priority-tagged headphones dangling around her neck. She placed her backpack in the overhead bin and turned back to watch Clarice's reaction. The attendant frowned slightly, as if studying Savannah's very soul, then moved on to stow a linen-wrapped tray. The silence that followed felt deafening. Savannah could almost hear the hum of the engine as passengers settled in. Soft murmurs of conversation drifted through the cabin. Discussions of business meetings, vacation itineraries, the latest in-flight movie. Yet she sensed an undercurrent of tension around her seat, as though gossip were already rippling through the rows. Who is she? Why was she held up? Did she do something wrong? Savannah tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and reached for her journal in the seat back pocket. She opened it to the blank page labeled Chapter 3, First Impressions. She penned a single sentence, "They're watching me." Then she closed the book, sliding it back under her arm. She refused to let herself look flimsy, though her heart still raced. Next, Clarice returned to Savannah's row with a discreet tablet in hand. She tapped the screen a few times, her brows knitting together. Savannah's stomach lurched. Was there a mistake? Had someone else been assigned to her seat? She squared her shoulders, ready to defend herself, to calmly explain that she'd checked in early, that her ticket was fully paid, that she had every right to this spot. But before she could utter a word, Clarice spoke again, this time just low enough for Savannah to hear. "Is this your first time flying first class, Miss Whitaker?" The question itself wasn't objectionable, but the way it hovered in the air, heavy with implication, felt like a test she hadn't signed up to take. Savannah drew a breath. "Yes, ma'am." Politeness sat at her lips like steel. "It's my first solo trip. My mom's in San Francisco in treatment, and I wanted to be there." Clarice's eyes flicked toward the aisle, then back. Of course. She tapped the tablet again. "Welcome aboard." Then, in a tone that somehow carried condescension, she added, "Enjoy your flight." Clarice moved away, but Savannah noticed the angle of her shoulders, the way she spoke to other passengers with unguarded warmth, how she laughed with the couple in 1B, how she bent down close to give instructions to a businessman in 2C. Savannah sat up, pushing her journal aside, and studied Clarice's interactions. The disparity stung, all courtesy for others, a cold dismissal for her. She felt a tight coil of frustration in her chest. As the plane filled, Savannah watched her fellow first-class passengers. The gentleman in 1B read a newspaper, oblivious. The elderly couple next to him whispered to each other, their fingers entwined. A young family in row 2 talked softly about the sights in San Francisco. No one looked at her anymore. They were consumed by their own journeys. Savannah felt alone again. A small voice inside urged her to shrink, turn away, ignore Clarice, slide into Economy Plus if it meant peace. But Savannah remembered every late night she'd spent pushing herself to be exceptional. Every moment her mother had cheered her on, "You belong anywhere you set your mind to." That memory flared in her mind like a beacon. She straightened her spine, flexed her fingers around the armrest, and met the gaze of the passenger across the aisle, a woman in her 50s who offered a brief nod of solidarity. Savannah let herself return that nod, letting the unspoken understanding pass between them. Something about this wasn't right. With the overhead bins clicking shut and the captain's voice chiming over the PA, the cabin settled into a hushed anticipation for takeoff. Savannah unzipped her backpack, pulling out noise-canceling headphones and an in-flight magazine. She feigned engrossment, but her mind buzzed with thoughts. Why was I singled out? What did I do wrong? Yet beneath the questions lay a whisper of resolve. I won't let this be the end of my story. As the seatbelt sign dinged on, Savannah pressed her journal to her lap, thumb resting on the next blank page. Chapter 3 was about more than first impressions. It was the first test of her courage under scrutiny. And though the path ahead was uncertain, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. She would not back down. Outside her window, the runway lights shimmered as the jet prepared to taxi. Savannah inhaled deeply, the cool scent of cabin air filling her lungs. This was her moment to gather strength for the storm to come. A storm she would weather with quiet confidence, ready to prove that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. Savannah's pulse quickened the moment the cabin door slid shut behind the last boarding passenger. She settled back into 1A, smoothing the seatbelt across her lap, determined to focus on her magazine. But before she could open it, a hush rippled through the aisle. Heads turned toward the entrance as a tall man in a crisply tailored navy suit appeared, his platinum elite badge gleaming at chest level. He carried himself with the surety of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Savannah watched through narrowed eyes as Clarice Morton, the lead flight attendant, straightened her posture and offered him an exaggeratedly warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," she cooed, extending her hand. "We're so glad you could join us." Mr. Caldwell flashed a practiced grin. 30 years old, salt and pepper hair, expensive cufflinks. He nodded curtly and stepped into first class, tossing a casual glance toward Savannah's row. In that instant, Savannah felt every eye in 1A lock onto her like a silent jury. Her stomach twisted. Clarice guided him to 1B, the seat beside Savannah. "I see you're a Platinum Elite member," Clarice said, voice honeyed. "We always prioritize our valued flyers." She tapped a few commands into her tablet and glanced briefly at Savannah, her expression unreadable. Savannah forced herself to tuck her magazine back into the seat back pocket. She drew in a slow breath, reminding herself she belonged here. She'd earned this seat with every AP exam and every late night studying constitutional law. But Clarice's shifting gaze made her feel as if she were an intruder in her own life. Mr. Caldwell settled into 1B with an almost theatrical sigh of relief. He leaned across Savannah's armrest, offering her a perfunctory nod. "Hope you don't mind," he said, adjusting his leather briefcase. "This is where I always sit." Savannah's cheeks heated. "Actually, I paid for 1A, she said, her voice steady despite the heat in her throat. "My seat was confirmed weeks ago." Caldwell's lips twitched into a smirk. "Yes, but sometimes things change," he replied, leaning back and crossing his arms. Before Savannah could respond, Clarice intervened. She raised her tablet and swiped, then looked up at Savannah with polite detachment. "We've had a last-minute overbooking situation in first class," she announced, her tone measured and loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "We need to reassign one seat. We can move you to Economy Plus, where you'll have extra leg room." A ripple of whispers coursed through the cabin. Savannah felt her heart pound like a drum, each beat echoing Clarice's words. "Overbooking," she mouthed silently. She glanced at her boarding pass again. GJ782, Seat 1A, printed in bold. There was no glitch in the system. Her ticket was valid and confirmed. Yet here she was, being asked to surrender her seat to someone who had shown up late. Fury flared in her chest, hot and bright. She thought of her mother, lying in a hospital bed across the country, fighting for her life. Was this how the world treated people who looked out of place? People who didn't have the right face or the right accent? Savannah clenched her fists in her lap, the nails digging into her palms. As she struggled for composure, she sensed a soft click behind her. A man 2 rows back had raised his phone, camera lens trained on the unfolding scene. In the reflection of the overhead light, Savannah caught the flash of a recording indicator. Someone was filming. She pressed her lips together. Any outburst now would play out on social media within minutes. Instead, she forced calm. "I'm sorry?" she asked Clarice, her voice level but firm. "I'm happy to go back if I've truly inconvenienced someone, but I checked in early and followed every step." "Why me?" Clarice's smile slipped into a polite, professional mask. She tapped a few more keys. "It's purely based on membership status," she said, nodding toward Mr. Caldwell. "We do apologize for the inconvenience." Savannah's chest tightened. She remembered every scholarship interview where she'd been asked about her resilience, every teacher who'd praised her calm under pressure. Right now, she needed that same resilience. She inhaled through her nose, the scent of citrus-scented cleaner filling her lungs. She lifted her chin ever so slightly, locking eyes with the woman filming 2 rows back. Then Savannah did something she almost never did. She let her guard slip. She allowed her lip to tremble for a fraction of a second, just enough. She drew her phone from her pocket, hit record, and pointed the camera at Clarice. Her heart thundered as she framed the shot, the crisp uniform, the tablet screen displaying seat reassignment, the eyes of passengers flicking between them. Clarice caught the movement in Savannah's peripheral vision and paused. For a heartbeat, she stared directly at Savannah. The warm mask cracked, revealing something sharper. Annoyance, maybe even fear. Savannah felt a faint spark of triumph. Clarice realized her act was being documented. "Miss Whitaker," Clarice said, voice cool, "please step into the aisle for a moment." She pointed behind Savannah. "We'll show you your new seat." Savannah rose smoothly, reclaiming the dignity that Clarice had tried to strip away. She squared her shoulders as she walked to the narrow walkway behind her seat. The overhead bins clicked shut, and the murmurs in the cabin hushed again, everyone leaning in to watch. She turned back toward Clarice. "Ma'am," she said softly but clearly, "I'd really like to keep my seat. I have a medical matter to attend to." "My mother," Clarice cut her off with a raised hand. "I'm very sorry, miss," she said, voice tight. "This is company policy." Savannah felt anger and disgust swirl together. This was more than policy, it was prejudice disguised as protocol. She clenched her free hand into a fist at her side. In that moment, every ounce of confidence she'd built felt both fragile and fiercely necessary. As she stood there, a hush fell over the cabin. It wasn't just curiosity in the air, it was solidarity. Savannah sensed that when she had briefly trembled, the cabin had collectively held its breath. Now, as she prepared to fight for her rightful place, she realized she wasn't entirely alone. She lifted her chin and squared her shoulders. "If that's your company policy," she said, voice steady, "could you please put me through to your supervisor?" Clarice hesitated, thumb hovering over the tablet. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded and tapped the screen. The cabin lights dimmed further as the engines hummed beneath them. Savannah held her position, every eye watching, every camera lens rolling. She was no longer a lone student in a sea of faces. She was a symbol of quiet resistance. Behind her, the smartphone recording ticked on. Savannah took a breath and braced herself for what came next, knowing that, whatever happened, she was ready to stand her ground. And, somewhere, in the back of her mind, she knew one call would change everything. Savannah's breath caught in her throat when Clarice Morton straightened, tablet tucked under her arm like a weapon, and swept her gaze across first class. The cabin's soft hum fell away as every passenger sensed the moment's gravity. Without preamble, Clarice's tone sharpened into cold authority. "Ms. Whitaker, if you refuse to comply, we will have you removed from this aircraft. We have the authority." Her words rippled through the cabin like a shockwave. Passengers froze mid-conversation, hands suspended over table trays, magazines flicked open to blank pages, champagne flutes paused halfway to lips. Even the flight crew beyond Clarice's station went still, watching. Savannah's heart thundered in her ears, and for a split second, she was certain she'd triggered some catastrophic mistake, until she remembered how she'd earned this seat. A low murmur rose from the row behind her. Savannah caught the glance of an elderly woman to her left. Silver hair, gentle eyes that had seen decades of life's unfair turns. The woman's hand pressed Savannah's knee once, a silent gesture of solidarity. It was a tiny lifeline, but enough to anchor her, removed from this aircraft. Savannah tasted the weight of those words. She pictured herself being escorted down the aisle by uniformed security, the doors sliding open onto the tarmac, the roar of jet engines swallowed by the wind. She could almost feel the cool night air of Denver without luggage, without her scholarship credentials, without the dignity she'd fought so hard to earn. Clarice took a deliberate step forward, leaning in so her voice carried like a blade. "I suggest you make this easy." Behind her, the lead flight attendant at the back whispered into a headset, probably alerting ground staff. Savannah suppressed the urge to bolt, to beg for mercy, to collapse. Instead, she pressed her spine against the seat back and drew in a measured breath. She set her jaw. "I've done nothing wrong," she said, voice low but steady. Her words trembled only on the edges, belying the tremor in her hands. "I paid for this seat. I confirmed my reservation." Clarice cut her off with a sharp motion. "That's irrelevant," she said, tone clipped. "We reserve the right to refuse service or reassign seating as we see fit." She gestured to the back of the cabin. "Please gather your personal items." The directive hung like an execution order. Savannah's stomach churned, bile rising. The elderly woman beside her squeezed her hand again. Across the aisle, a middle-aged man in a business suit rose slowly, the steely look in his eyes shifting from idle curiosity to something fiercer. Maybe outrage? Maybe empathy. Savannah nodded at him, a silent "thank you." She opened her backpack on her lap and pulled out a small photograph of her mom smiling in a hospital room. Chemo hat, brave grin. For a moment, the world narrowed to that snapshot. The promise she'd made to be there, to hold her mom's hand, to remind her she wasn't alone. Savannah tucked the photo back inside and met Clarice's gaze without flinching. Behind her, the elderly woman whispered to her companion, "She's earned that seat." The words drifted back to Savannah like warm sunlight. She lifted her chin. "Go ahead," she said softly. "Have me removed." Clarice's lips thinned. She pressed a button on her tablet. Savannah felt a jolt in the aisle as the door to the cockpit slid open and a uniformed crew member appeared, radio in hand. The cabin held its breath again, waiting to see if power truly lay in Clarice's words or in Savannah's quiet defiance. In that pregnant pause, Savannah's resolve crystallized. She had passed every test. Late nights studying, scholarship applications, interviews that could have broken her composure. Now, at 35,000 feet, she faced a test more personal, refusing to bow to prejudice. Her heartbeat steadied, the faint tremor subsiding into a calm fire. Clarice opened her mouth as though to speak, then closed it, brow furrowing. The flight attendant behind her lowered the headset and stepped forward, uncertainty in his eyes. Savannah inhaled one last time and held her ground, the cabin's silent witness to a standoff that would end not in submission, but in justice. Because on this flight, a girl in seat Ton A refused to be defined by anyone's assumptions, no matter how official their uniform. Savannah sat back down in seat 1A, her hands trembling just enough that she had to grip the armrests to steady herself. Around her, first class resumed its low murmur of conversation and the soft clinking of service carts, but to Savannah it felt like a distant echo. Her world had narrowed to the leather cushion beneath her, and the tablet she now silently retrieved from the seat back pocket. The screen glowed with a dozen icons, but only one mattered: FaceTime. He tapped the little green icon with deliberate calm, mindful of the eyes that might still be on her. The cabin lights seemed to dim as she held the phone up, framing her own face, pale, determined, and resolute. She felt an odd surge of confidence at the absurdity of it all. Here she was, 17 years old, making a video call, literally mid-air, in front of strangers she'd never meet again, and a flight attendant who had just threatened to have her removed. "Dad?" Her voice was almost a whisper, but it carried all the authority she needed. "I need your help." On the other end, the screen flickered to show Eli Whitaker in his private office. The backdrop was unmistakable. Mahogany shelves laden with leather-bound books, a wide window overlooking a city skyline, and a subtle gleam of metal from a corporate award on his desk. He leaned forward, concern sharpening his gaze. "Savannah, what's going on?" he asked, his voice rich and steady like polished oak. She swallowed. "Clarice Morton, the lead flight attendant. She's trying to kick me out of first class. Overbooking, seat reassignment. She said if I don't comply, they'll remove me mid-flight." Eli's jaw tightened visibly. Savannah felt the full weight of his authority in that moment, the calm before a storm. "Okay," he said, exhaling once. "Stay seated. Don't say anything else to her. I'm on it." Her heart fluttered with relief. "Thank you," she whispered, pressing the phone to her chest for a heartbeat. Then she held it up again. "Dad, can you talk to them?" Her voice hitched at the edges, but she forced herself to keep it level. A brief pause and then a stern murmur. "Clarice Morton, step away from the galley immediately." Savannah's breath caught. She watched the line freeze on her father's face, his lips moving in that measured tone, exactly the way he used in press conferences and board meetings. For a split second, Savannah could almost see Clarice's reaction. Shock, a flicker of fear. "Dad?" she asked softly. "Give me 20 seconds, he replied. "I'm activating clear cabin protocol. They'll patch a video feed through in a moment." Savannah nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She lowered the phone and leaned back, her spine straight. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The engine's whir became louder in her ears, a heartbeat counting down. She glanced to the aisle just in time to see Clarice's shoulders twitch, her composure faltering. The other flight attendants gathered near the galley, whispering to one another, casting glances at a discreet screen embedded in the bulkhead. Savannah couldn't see the monitor, but she knew what was coming. "Ms. Whitaker," said the cabin manager, a woman she'd never met, approaching with a clipboard. Her tone was gentle but firm. "Please remain in your seat. You'll hear from the captain shortly." Savannah offered a small, grateful nod, clipping her phone back into her jeans pocket. The cabin manager met her eyes briefly, as if passing along silent reassurance. Savannah's chest warmed with a flicker of trust. This wasn't about her status or her ticket. Something bigger was at play. Across the aisle, the platinum elite passenger, Mr. Caldwell, shifted uncomfortably. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize or to protest. Savannah couldn't tell which, but thought better of it and settled back. A hush fell over first class. The soft overhead announcement chime chimed, and Savannah recognized the captain's voice before even hearing the words. Calm, authoritative, unmistakable. She felt her pulse quicken, then slow as the captain's words crackled through the speakers embedded in every seat. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Davis," he began. "We apologize for the earlier confusion regarding seating. I'm receiving direct orders from Mr. Eli Whitaker, a significant stakeholder in Global Jet Airways." Savannah's heart pounded, each word resonating through the cabin. She caught her father's eye on her phone's small screen, the line still active, and saw the faint curve of a satisfied smile on his lips. "And effective immediately," the captain continued. "All crew actions regarding seat reassignments on Flight 782 are voided. Ms. Whitaker retains her seat in first class, and the cabin crew will remain in place pending an internal review. A collective exhale swept the cabin. Savannah felt the tension melt out of her shoulders, replaced by a rush of triumph so sweet she had to clamp her hands over her mouth to keep from crying out. Her father's voice crackled again in her ear, low and approving. "You did the right thing, Savvy." Tears pricked her eyes, but she blinked them back. She didn't need to offer any grand speech. The subtle power of that phone call had done more than any argument could. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and folded her hands in her lap, face calm, demeanor collected. Around her, other passengers glanced at each other, some breaking into soft smiles, others nodding in silent respect. Savannah caught the eye of the elderly woman she'd seen earlier. The woman's warm expression said everything words could not. Clarice Morton, restored to her polished professional mask, offered Savannah the slightest, reluctant nod, an acknowledgement not of victory, but of defeat. Savannah dipped her head in return, offering as much grace as she could muster. The seatbelt sign dinged to indicate takeoff was imminent. Savannah exhaled, chest expanding with relief and pride. She had faced humiliation and threats. She had risked appearing impudent in front of strangers, but in that moment, she felt an unshakable sense of belonging. As the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi, Savannah Whitaker settled back into 1A, her journey far from over, but now emboldened by the quiet power of one call. One call that reminded the world exactly who she was and why no one had the right to tell her otherwise. Savannah Whitaker barely registered the engine's gentle roar as Flight 782 leveled off at 35,000 feet. In the moments before takeoff, first class had buzzed with the soft clink of crystal flutes and hushed conversations about business deals and family vacations. Now, with the seatbelt sign extinguished, an almost reverent silence settled over the cabin. Savannah sat rigid in 1A, her knuckles white on the leather armrest, watching her carry-on shift unsteadily above her in the overhead bin. She had just hung up with her father. 20 seconds earlier, she heard Clarice Morton's sharp intake of breath as Clarice read the terse instruction on her tablet. CCP level read initiated. CEO inbound. Savannah had caught the flicker of fear in Clarice's eyes, an emotion so foreign on that perfectly poised face that it left a chill in the air. Behind Savannah, the lead cabin manager, a woman named Teresa Evans, whom Savannah had never met before, stood surveying the scene with calm authority. Teresa's crisp uniform and clipped hair lent her the look of someone who could solve any problem without raising her voice. She moved toward Savannah's row, each step measured, drawing the attention of every passenger in first class. Savannah held her breath, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. She glanced across the aisle. Mr. Caldwell, the platinum sectag businessman who had tried to claim her seat, sat rigid in 1B, eyes darting between the cabin manager and Savannah. In 2A, the elderly couple leaned forward, silent solidarity in their gaze. The soft glow of individual reading lamps illuminated sharpened expressions of curiosity, tension, and something that looked a lot like awe. Teresa paused beside Savannah's seat and offered a small, respectful nod. Savannah returned the gesture, her heart drumming in her chest. She felt like prey in a pack, yet somehow the pack was watching the wrong animal. "Ms. Whitaker," Teresa said, voice low enough to keep the moment intimate, yet audible to the row behind. "Please remain in your seat. We've received direct orders from Global Jet Corporate." Savannah's pulse fluttered. "Yes, ma'am," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Every syllable felt precious. If she stumbled, Clarice might seize on it as evidence of insubordination or insecurity. Teresa scanned the cabin once more before tapping a few commands on her own tablet. Savannah noticed a discreet icon blinking in the upper corner of the device. CEO incoming. The indicator sent a ripple through the crew. One attendant raised an eyebrow, another exchanged a quick look with a colleague. All of them, even Clarice, seemed caught in a momentary limbo between duty and dread. In that pregnant pause, Savannah allowed herself a flicker of hope. Her father had promised he'd handle it. Now she saw his reach. She pictured him in his high-rise office, speaking into that same screen, with the measured calm that commanded boardrooms and news cameras alike. He'd done it before, navigated crises that seemed insurmountable. He'd never failed her. A murmur rose somewhere behind her as the platinum sidge of passenger Tassier. "Caldwell," rose from 1B and cleared his throat. Savannah braced. She expected confrontation, an attempt to reclaim his rightful seat, another display of entitlement. Instead, he extended his hand toward her, a gesture of apology and acknowledgement. "I think you should stay put," he whispered. "Clearly, this isn't on you." Savannah offered him a grateful smile. Surprised by the solidarity from someone she'd assumed would be her adversary, it was a tiny reminder that allies could appear in unlikely places. Then the cabin lights dimmed further. The cue orchestrated by the crew as part of the protocol, according to the subdued murmurs among the attendants. The hum of the HVA system sank into the background, replaced by the palpable click of anticipation. Savannah felt the hairs on her arms rise, a mixture of adrenaline and relief. Clarice Morton, still clutching her tablet like a lifeline, hovered near the galley. Savannah caught her jaw tighten as the attendant tapped a command, "Show video feed." Teresa glanced at Clarice's screen, then at Savannah, and gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. The decision had been made. Savannah's breath hitched. Whatever came next, she was ready. She felt the shift in power in a way that was almost physical, like a gust of wind rearranging the sands of a dune. First class had always been a place of polished service and polite distance. Now it was a stage for something far larger, a quiet showdown between entrenched authority and peaceful resistance. A soft chime sounded as the cockpit door slid open. Savannah's heart performed a double take. The door itself became a portal to change. She sensed the captain stepping forward, though she couldn't see him yet. The flight attendant straightened, the cabin poised in expectation, and then, without warning, a gentle voice crackled through the overhead speakers. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Davis. I have a message direct from Mr. Eli Whitaker, CEO of Global Jet Airways." Savannah's throat went dry. The very air in the cabin seemed to hold its breath. She closed her eyes for a moment, bracing herself, then opened them to meet the cabin manager's gaze. Teresa's eyes were steady, encouraging. "You did what you needed to do. Now let the world witness." As Captain Davis continued, Savannah allowed a small, triumphant smile to break across her lips. She didn't need to shout or plead. Her silent stand, backed by a single well-timed call, was about to rewrite the story of Flight 782. Proof that courage need not be loud to be heard. And in the hush of first class, at 35,000 feet, Savannah Whitaker realized that the most powerful resistance could take place without a single raised voice. The cabin lights softened as the engines steadied into their cruise hum. Savannah Whitaker sat back in 1A, heart still fluttering from the promise of what was about to happen. Around her, first-class passengers settled into their seats, relaxing their shoulders, lifting menus and reaching for champagne flutes, until the soft chime of the public address system cut through the gentle chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen," came Captain Davis's voice, low and measured, "this is your captain speaking." Savannah straightened, every nerve alive with anticipation. She'd heard the private video call earlier, saw the fear flash across Clarice Morton's face. Now, the world was about to watch the fallout. "I want to address the earlier seating incident," the captain continued. "Global Jet Airways takes great pride in treating every passenger with respect and dignity. Effective immediately, Ms. Clarice Morton is relieved of her duties as lead flight attendant on Flight 782. I apologize to Miss Whitaker and to all of you for any distress this may have caused." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Savannah's stomach fluttered. This was it. She felt a steady warmth bloom in her chest, a quiet satisfaction that washed through her, more powerful than any applause. Clarice, standing near the aft galley, looked ashen. Her pristine navy uniform hung limp, and the tablet she still clutched offered no comfort. Savannah watched as Teresa Evans, the cabin manager, approached Clarice with compassionate efficiency. "Mrs. Morton," Teresa said softly, "please join me in the galley." Clarice's lips parted, then pressed into a thin line. She nodded once, the slightest tremor betraying her composure. As she folded her tablet against her chest, Savannah noticed tears glinting at the corners of her eyes, an acknowledgement that this was not simply company policy, but a personal reckoning. With measured dignity, Clarice turned and walked past Savannah's row. Every passenger's gaze followed her. The middle-aged executive paused mid-sip. The elderly couple leaned forward in sympathetic silence. The businesswoman in 2C closed her laptop and watched. That moment felt suspended in time, a universal reckoning of power inverted. Savannah held her breath until Clarice had disappeared into the galley. Then, almost imperceptibly, she exhaled and allowed a small, private smile. It wasn't a victory dance. Too loud, too brash, but a still, shining pulse of justice fulfilled. The flight attendant, who'd replaced Clarice, Tasha, a young woman with a warm smile, slipped into the lead role. She moved down the aisle, offering towels and menus with genuine warmth. Savannah watched as Tasha paused at her seat. "Ms. Whitaker," she said, voice gentle, "I'm so sorry you had to go through that. Can I get you something to drink?" "Champagne, please," Savannah replied, voice steady. "And thank you, really." Tasha nodded, eyes kind. "It's on us." As Tasha disappeared into the galley, Savannah reached for her journal. She flipped pages until she found Chapter 8, Public Vindication, then rested her pen above the page. She didn't need to write anything yet. She wanted to feel the moment, to savor the exact texture of this triumph. The cabin lights brightened again as the service carts emerged. Glasses clinked, soft music drifted from the overhead speakers, and the cabin returned to its gentle routine, only now with an undercurrent of renewed respect. Passengers glanced Savannah's way, some offering a quiet nod or a soft smile. Savannah felt a flush of gratitude. She'd set out to defend her dignity. Now she realized she'd also restored something in others, the belief that fairness could happen, even miles above the ground. Farther back, she heard the hum of confirmation on Clarice's tablet as Teresa Evans tapped through a procedural checklist. Savannah guessed that Clarice was being escorted off duty for the rest of the flight. No exaggeration, no delay. "Entire crew fired," as the headline would read. A flight attendant passed with a silver service tray, offering recompte menu items. Savannah selected the lobster bisque, leaning into the luxury she'd earned. Steam curled from the bowl as the attendant set it before her. She brought the spoon to her lips and paused. Tangy, rich, comforting. She glanced out the window. Cloud tops stretched to the horizon in a sea of white, touched by the rosy glow of late afternoon sun. For a moment, Savannah let herself feel weightless, both literally as the plane glided through the sky and figuratively. as the weight of humiliation lifted from her shoulders. Her phone buzzed softly, an incoming text from her father. "Well done." She tapped a thumbs-up emoji and set the device aside. That was all they needed to say. No speechy lessons on power or privilege, no public statements. Just 2 words: well done. Savannah returned to her soup, spoon raised, and savored a bite. She thought of her mother, waiting in San Francisco, still fighting her own battle. Soon, Savannah would join her, seat secured, pride intact. And when she walked through that hospital door, she'd carry this moment with her, the defiance of one quiet call, the hush and cheer of the cabin, the knowledge that dignity belonged to anyone brave enough to claim it. As the bisque warmed her from the inside, Savannah closed her eyes and allowed a small, contented sigh. First class had always been more than a seat. It was a statement of worth. And on Flight 782, Savannah Whitaker had proved she belonged here in every sense. Savannah Whitaker felt the aircraft shudder softly as the wheels kissed the tarmac at San Francisco International Airport. The familiar chime of the seatbelt sign flicked on, and for the first time since takeoff, she allowed her body to relax just a fraction against the plush leather of seat 1A. Below her, the world had changed, but right here in the cabin, the air crackled with anticipation. Moments after the plane came to a full stop and the engines powered down, the cabin doors slid open with a precise mechanical hiss. A small group of stern-faced men and women in navy suits and earpieces stepped aboard. Global Jet's internal investigations team, by Savannah's reckoning. They moved with calm efficiency, heads down, briefing tablets in hand. Savannah felt her pulse quicken as they passed through the aisle, their eyes locked on the uniformed crew. Teresa Evans, the cabin manager who had sided with Savannah, rose from her post and greeted the investigators with a curt nod. By the time they reached the galley, the lead investigator, a tall woman with silver-rimmed glasses, cleared her throat and raised a hand for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice carrying the gravity of authority. "By directive of Global Jet Airways executive offices, this cabin crew is relieved of all duties, effective immediately. You are to remain here until further notice. We will conduct a full review of today's events." A hush fell over first class. The original flight crew, once moving with practiced grace, stood frozen, trays in hand, expressions taut with confusion and shame. Savannah watched as Clarice Morton, now pale and silent, was guided toward the galley. A few tears glistened at the corners of her eyes. Savannah felt a pang of sympathy for the woman, but it was tempered by the knowledge that true accountability was long overdue. As the investigators began to cordon off the forward cabin, Captain Davis reappeared at the foot of the aisle, crisp in his uniform. He paused, glanced at Savannah's row, and stepped forward. The cabin lights brightened, as though spotlighting this moment for his apology. "Ms. Whitaker," he began, his voice warm and sincere. "On behalf of Global Jet Airways, I want to express our deepest regrets for the treatment you experienced today. Our policies exist to protect passengers, not to intimidate or humiliate. We fell short of our own standards." Savannah felt her throat tighten. The captain's apology was more than words. It was a reversal of the humiliation she'd endured just hours earlier. The passengers around her, executives, families, solo travelers, leaned in, their curiosity giving way to warm nods and murmurs of agreement. The elderly couple in 2A, the ones who'd given Savannah sympathetic glances, stood and approached her. The woman's silver curls glinted in the cabin light as she spoke softly. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice quavering with emotion. "Thank you for standing up for yourself. You showed us all what it means to have dignity." The man with her offered a gentle smile. "If more people had your courage, the world would be a better place." Savannah's heart swelled. She accepted their words with a nod, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just about her seat anymore. It was about every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. Across the aisle, Mr. Caldwell, the platinum elite passenger who'd once demanded her seat, approached as well. He offered a formal bow of his head. "My apologies," he said quietly. "I was wrong. I hope you'll forgive me." Savannah shook her head with a small, genuine smile. "Thank you," she replied. "I appreciate that." A buzz rose as the flight attendants, Tasha and two others, stepped forward, offering fresh glasses of water and small chocolate squares. Their faces were apologetic, eyes downcast but earnest. Savannah took a sip of water and let the sweetness of the chocolate ground her back in gratitude. Behind her, the investigation team set up a temporary checkpoint at the front door of the cabin. Crew members were escorted off to give statements. One young attendant broke into tears as she recounted overhearing Clarice's original threat. Savannah felt a mixture of triumph and sorrow. Triumph that justice was being served, sorrow for the shame so many had internalized. "Miss Whitaker," Captain Davis said once more, leaning in so his voice remained private. "As a gesture of goodwill, please allow us to extend a complimentary upgrade on your next 3 flights, along with access to our executive lounge for a year. And of course, any accommodations you need in San Francisco will be on us." Savannah was caught off guard by the offer's generosity. It wasn't about the freebies. It was the company's clear admission that what had occurred was unacceptable. She nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Captain. That means a lot." He straightened, tipping his cap, and moved on to deplane the rest of the passengers. Teresa Evans rejoined Savannah at her seat, discreetly offering a reassuring smile and a folded note. Savannah unfolded it to find a simple message. "Thank you for showing us all what true courage looks like." She tucked the note into her journal and closed the cover. Then she returned her attention to the window, where the runway lights stretched out in neat lines, guiding them forward. As the last of the internal investigators headed down the aisle, Savannah's fellow passengers began to gather their belongings. Some offered parting words of encouragement. "Stay strong. You did the right thing. We're with you." Their voices crisscrossed the cabin in a gentle chorus of support. Savannah took a moment to inhale the subtle scent of citrus cleaner mixed with lingering champagne. She allowed herself a private smile. She had set out to claim her dignity. Now she realized she'd rekindled it in others, too. When the cabin emptied and only she, the elderly couple, and a few crew members remained, Savannah stood, stretching her limbs. She reached into her backpack and pulled out her journal. On a fresh page marked Chapter 9, Touchdown and Reckoning, she wrote 3 simple words. "Justice delivered today." She glanced around the cabin. Empty glasses, crumpled napkins, a scattering of receipts on the tray tables, and thought of how drastically the atmosphere had shifted from the sharp sting of injustice to the warm glow of community. It was a transformation she knew her audience at home would find gratifying. The moment when wrongs were righted, wounds began to heal, and passengers felt safe again. With the ground crew signaling readiness, Savannah gathered her things. She'd survived the remainder of the flight on autopilot. All she could think about was meeting her mother, feeling her embrace, and sharing this story of quiet resilience. As she stepped off the aircraft and onto the jet bridge, Savannah Whitaker carried with her more than a boarding pass. She carried a renewed faith in fairness, proof that one person's quiet conviction, backed by the right ally, could ripple outward and restore dignity to an entire cabin. And as she walked toward the terminal lights, she smiled, knowing her fight had become someone else's inspiration. That no matter where you sit, your voice matters. The moment Savannah stepped into the San Francisco terminal, her phone began to vibrate non-stop. By the time she reached the luggage carousel, her pockets were hot with notifications. She paused, breath catching as she scanned the first few headlines. "She belongs here" explodes on Twitter. "Global Jet's PR nightmare." "First class White, airline under fire for discrimination." BuzzFeed. Global Jet shares plummet 6.2% after viral video. CNBC. Her stomach did a flip. She fished her boarding pass and backpack onto the carousel and ducked into a quiet corner. A dozen apps pinged in unison. Text messages from friends, Instagram tags from classmates who'd seen the clip of Clarissa's threat, emails from school administrators checking on her safety. Savannah tapped open Twitter first. The original clip, shot by a fellow passenger, was already closing in on 3 million views. Scrolling through replies, she saw solidarity flooding in. "That girl is a hero. Finally some accountability. One call changes everything." The hashtag #SheBelongsHere trended beyond aviation circles, carried by advocates for respect and equality. She opened the Wall Street Journal app. The banner read, "Global Jet's value takes hit as discrimination scandal goes viral. Insider CEO's quick video call a damage control masterstroke," a subhead boasted. Savannah's father's swift intervention was being hailed as decisive leadership, though a part of her winced at the spotlight on his wealth. She'd asked for justice, not fame. Still, she tapped the article and read about the board convening an emergency session, investors demanding a thorough policy overhaul, and analysts warning of continued volatility if Global Jet didn't follow through on promised reforms. An alert popped up. Her father had FaceTimed her. She declined. It wasn't about him now. This was her moment to absorb the ripple effect. Across the bay, news vans were already camped outside Global Jet's headquarters. Anchor women in crisp jackets delivered blow-by-blow accounts, interviews with aviation experts, clips from the flight, even a travel blogger offering 5 tips to prevent first-class discrimination. Savvy rolled her eyes at that last one but swallowed a proud smile. Ping drew her to Instagram. A carousel of images for the story feed. Photo 1, her standing in 1A. Photo 2, Clarice stepping away. Photo 3, the stock ticker slide. Photo 4, Tasha replacing her with a radiant smile. Savannah tapped her own account, saw friend requests triple, DMs flooding. "You okay? So proud of you. Teach me how to be that brave." She drafted a quick reply. "Thanks everyone. Safe and grateful." Then she closed the app. Her boarding pass facade in her hand, Savannah wandered toward the taxi stand. She felt the weight of what had happened settle over her ribs. On one hand, the world had seen her grace and grit. On the other, the aftershocks of a single video call had claimed jobs, rattled markets, and forced a powerful company to confront its failures. A final notification chimed. Global Jet's official press release. She opened the PDF. Global Jet Airways deeply regrets the incident on Flight 782. We are implementing mandatory sensitivity training, establishing a passenger advocacy office, and pledging $5 million, 0 cents, to a diversity scholarship fund. Savannah tucked her phone away. She knew policy changes and donations were only the beginning. Real change happened, one interaction at a time, when people refused to stay silent, even in the smallest of routes. As her ride to the hotel arrived, Savannah climbed into the back seat and watched the city blur past. The neon glow of Welcome to San Francisco reflected on her window. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the swell of pride and the quiet resolve that this story was far from over. Eli Whitaker peered around the glossy mahogany boardroom table, his gray-flecked hair catching the late afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. 14 directors sat in crisp suits, eyes flicking between their tablets and the man who controlled nearly a third of their airline. Savannah's story had gone viral hours ago, and now the weight of the world's scrutiny rested on this gathering. Clearing his throat, Eli leaned forward. "Thank you all for coming at such short notice," he began, voice calm but carrying unmistakable steel. "What happened on Flight 782 isn't just an isolated mistake. It's symptomatic of a deeper cultural failure, one that tells people, often quietly, who deserves respect and who." He tapped his tablet and the screen behind him lit up with the hashtag "She belongs here" and a timeline of share price drops. 6.2% since yesterday. Murmurs rippled through the room. Directors exchanged uneasy glances, recalling headline after headline: "Global Jet's Anatomy of Discrimination. Passengers Revolt Online." Eli held his gaze. "This isn't about making headlines or damage control," he continued. "It's about restoring the very dignity our brand claims to uphold. I don't want band-aid fixes. I want a complete reset." He paused for effect, letting the gravity sink in. "I'm calling for 3 immediate actions." First, he tapped again, revealing a slide titled Independent Passenger Advocacy Office. Every passenger complaint, regardless of status or ticket class, will be funneled through an impartial office, staffed by third-party human rights experts. No more silos. Second, a slide appeared, mandatory cultural sensitivity training. By the end of this quarter, every employee, frontline crew, gate agents, executives will undergo immersive workshops led by civil rights organizations. We won't just teach policies, we'll challenge mindsets. Third, he switched to board-level oversight and quarterly reporting. "I'm establishing a permanent ethics subcommittee, reporting directly to the board. We'll publish quarterly metrics on passenger equity, publicly. Shareholders, the public, and yes, the press will see our progress." A hush fell. The directors processed the scope. Independent offices, public reports, a complete culture shift. It was bold, perhaps unprecedented in aviation. Then Eli's tone softened. "I'm not asking for your permission. I'm informing you of the direction I've mandated. Those who can't support this vision will have an opportunity to exit, gracefully, at market value." He offered a small, compassionate nod to the most senior members. "We're not in the business of protecting anyone who resists growth and accountability." He leaned back. "This started with my daughter's courage. It ends with our collective commitment to treat every human being with dignity, whether they're in 1A or row 42C. In the silence that followed, Savannah's story transformed from personal injustice into a corporate mission. The boardroom, once a chamber of cautious, profit-first deliberations, now hummed with purpose. Outside, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Savannah Whitaker's silent stand aboard Flight 782 was already reshaping an industry. And tonight, those new policies would ripple across Global Jet's thousands of employees, ensuring that no one else would ever again be told they didn't belong. Savannah Whitaker settled into seat 1A with a quiet sense of completion she hadn't known was possible. It had been 2 weeks since Flight 782's scandal made headlines, 2 weeks of policy overhauls and board meetings and interviews she'd mostly let her father handle. Today, she was on a shorter hop from San Francisco back to Greenwich, a quick trip home before her mother's next round of treatment. As she buckled her seatbelt, Savannah took in the familiar luxuries of first class. The soft leather, the touchscreen controls, the glimmer of polished metal in the tray table. But this time, the beauty of the cabin felt different. It was no longer a symbol of privilege she had to defend, but a space where dignity was meant for everyone. A few rows back, the flight attendant Tasha greeted Savannah by name, her smile warm and genuine. "Welcome back, Miss Whitaker. Anything I can get you for takeoff?" "Just water, please," Savannah replied, her voice steady, grateful for the courtesy that felt earned rather than extended out of obligation. Tasha nodded and moved down the aisle. Savannah let her gaze drift to the doorway as the last passenger climbed aboard. That's when she saw her, an elderly woman, maybe in her late 60s, with silver-white hair pinned neatly under a silk scarf. The woman carried a single leather tote and wore a soft smile that crinkled the corners of her warm brown eyes. As the flight attendant indicated her seat, 1B, right beside Savannah, the woman paused, studied Savannah for a moment, then cleared her throat. "Excuse me," she began in a husky voice. "Is this seat beside you?" Savannah offered her own welcoming smile. "Yes, ma'am, 1B. Welcome aboard." The woman's eyes glistened ever so slightly. "I've never flown first class before," she admitted, lowering her gaze. "I wasn't sure someone like me belonged here." Savannah felt her chest tighten with recognition. She offered a gentle nod. "You belong here," she said quietly, sliding her bag into the overhead bin for the woman. "Everyone belongs here." The elderly woman's lips curved into a relieved smile. "Thank you," she whispered. "It means more than you know." As the door closed and the plane began to taxi, Savannah reflected on how much had changed. She thought back to the moment Clarice Morton had told her she didn't belong, the trembling tightness in her throat when she'd called her dad, and the transformative hush that had fallen over the cabin when the CEO's video call played out for everyone to see. She hadn't needed to shout or plead. She'd needed to stand firm. Now, sitting side by side with a fellow passenger who'd once feared being out of place, Savannah realized that her quiet courage had rippled outward. Policies hadn't just changed on paper. They'd shifted in people's minds and hearts. She clicked her seatbelt into place and offered the woman a small travel pillow with a flourish. "Here, anything to make you more comfortable." As the engines roared for takeoff, Savannah looked out at the runway lights fading behind them. She whispered to herself, "Welcome aboard," not just to the woman beside her, but to the idea that everyone deserved a place of respect. And as the plane lifted into the sky, Savannah Whitaker knew this wasn't the end of her story. It was simply the beginning of how one voice, soft but unwavering, could change what it means to belong.